I'm welcoming Carolyn McDonald, who is instrumental in various phases of the Women's Center, and we are adding to our list of women who have been involved so that we are compiling a history of the Women's Center in Marquette. Welcome, Carolyn, and if you'll give us just a little bit of your background and then what led you to the Women's Center.
Sure, thank you. Nice to be here. I came to Marquette in the early 60s. I had transferred from Ohio University. And I thought, why would I ever want to go anywhere else to live? I could ski and sail and fish and hunt and just raise two children here. And the only thing I ever missed was museums and the opera and the ballet. Otherwise, I'm content to be here. Married a Marquette native, and I just never left.
Good decision, good decision. Okay, what drew you to the women's movement and ultimately the Women's Center?
Well, I was actually going through a divorce. I was separated at the time from my husband. I had a brand new baby and a 3.5-year-old, and I was a school teacher, but they didn't have maternity leave at that time. So I just was off for a year. And a friend called me and said that she was part of a consciousness raising group and she thought I needed it. And I said, I'm so needy right now, I'm sure I do. So they all came to my house because I couldn't get a babysitter. That was money I certainly didn't have. And I remember thinking, well, how am I going to buy refreshments for this group? So I just called my friend back and said, bring your own beverages. And got involved in consciousness raising more and more, became more and more involved and made a lot of good friends. And then the consciousness raising groups met at a local church. And then we divided into small groups. And I really don't remember how that worked exactly, but then at some point our group joined with another group, and my lifelong friends have come from that experience.
Was that an ongoing thing over months, years? How did that?
Months, possibly a year or so. I can remember various people, many of whom are gone now, and we just talked about different things, and there were different issues that came up for action. The one I remember most clearly is the one where the group wanted to picket the library because you could only get a library card in your husband's name. So my name was Mrs. Paul Grant. And I really didn't care whose name was on it as long as I could go and get a book. Well, they were ready to drum me out because I didn't have enough passion about the whole consciousness raising experience, and I just said, have at it, I'll be home with my kids, you know. It's probably a very important thing, but it just wasn't to me at that.
And this seems to follow. Individual women had certain concerns, and again, when you're at home raising children, you only have so much energy.
The second rallying point that I recall that was really significant, I mean, there were many, but the Hotel Northland they had a restaurant called the Crow's Nest, and they wanted all the waitresses to wear miniskirts. It was miniskirt time. Well, first of all, being a waitress in a miniskirt is difficult. You have to learn to do the Playboy dip. And a lot of the waitresses there were professional waitresses who were older, and they were not going to make the miniskirt routine at all. So that one I did get involved in, and I remember talking to Ted Bogdan saying, you know, would you want your mother in a miniskirt? Would your mother want to wear one? And we're all prepared in a nonviolent way just to say, we're never coming here again, and you know, you do what you need to do, but it's just important for you to know many of us feel very strongly against your new miniskirt plan.
Did they adjust?
He adjusted it, which was really good. So that was empowering.
Okay. What led from the consciousness raising then?
Well, it was the beginning of the Women's Center. And so there were groups set up to do things like role model teams, peer group leader. We did goal setting teams. I remember being asked to do one called The Woman Alone, and I said, that's just horrible. That makes me feel terrible. How about The Woman in Transition or something? I'm never calling it The Woman Alone. And from that group of goal setting, we talked about various skill sets and briefly where are you today, and then where do you want to be tomorrow? And how are you going to get there? What steps will you take? And I think we were all sort of needy in a way that we just didn't know where we wanted to go. And it really empowered us. So in one of the goal setting sessions, my husband and I were on Front Street renting a house. And a woman in the group had been married for years and years, and her husband decided he didn't want to be married anymore. So every goal setting parameter, what are you going to do today? What about tomorrow? What about next week? She wrote down, sell my house, sell my house, sell my house. And it was so hard to stay on track for the rest of the session because we were looking for a house. But I didn't want to use the goal setting time. But the minute it was over, I said, where do you live? We're looking for a house. And we actually bought her house. So that was
Practical linking.
practical linking. Yeah, that's a good
Now, the
expression.
groups you're describing were all under the umbrella of the newly established Women's Center.
They were. And we went into the churches, and I remember one of the things I did was I went to Nagani and talked to a class of pregnant teenagers who were not allowed to be in the school. But I think, my recollection's a little fuzzy, I think it was part of the Marquette Alger Intermediate School District. But I met with all these pregnant teenagers and talked about, where do we go from here? And was used purposefully because we wanted them to know they're not alone in this. And we had a lot of resources that we could share.
So you were reaching all age groups, you were helping meet your own needs at the
Right.
time, and your skills as a teacher obviously played into it, the right person at the right time. Oh,
And then some of the groups they were all held in different places, but I became aware of how many women would not go to Northern for a class on how to empower yourself.
because
Because I was involved in a project AAUW did. They had a script, and we filmed at the university at the TV station. And I took a role in that along with Judy Smith and Sandra Michaels, and I can't remember who else. And the man who was my husband in this film, I don't remember his name, but he was a married student at Northern, and it just talked about a woman wanting to go back to school and get some education and how her family dealt with that. And I realized that many women would never go, they might go to community schools, because you could say to your husband, I want to take a class at community schools. His mindset might be education, but it also might be that you're going to take cake decorating, which would be wonderful. To let your wife go to school.
So in that era, many men still did not want to see their wife move on in education.
Yeah. And it hit all, shall I say, strata of society. There were so many presumptions of what a woman should do and what a man should allow his wife to do. So it was really interesting. And the community schools classes were much bigger than any of the other classes I ever did. And I can remember so many stories, but the one that stands out in my mind is the woman who said, I'm here because I have 2 daughters, and we don't have much money, and they get made fun of at school for the type of clothes they wear and the shoes they wear. And so that brought it down to earth.
The
That
reality.
maybe what we were doing before was important, but this was just monumental.
And what you're mentioning with AAUW and community schools, it shows again the links that once people knew the issues, the collaboration or supporting one another, and you touched a lot of different groups in that
Yes.
way. Excellent.
Yeah. All different ages, too.
Great. And then you were involved in some of the organizational processes, or just
Not particularly. I was more a worker bee. My friends were the brains of it all. Holly and Pat and Gail, and I think Sally was involved at that time. And forgive me if I'm leaving anyone out, but I remember when Dr. Berg talked to Holly and we were able to get into Northern for the office. And I was teaching 2 days a week at the Marquette Co-op Nursery and 3 days a week at Northern's Child Development Center. So I have 2 little kids and a husband, and I'm working full-time, and I don't even have a crock pot. So I needed to make some plans, and I thought, I need to get somebody to come and clean my house. And I put a sign up at the Women's Center office, and this woman named, I can say her name, was Rosie Allenzock. She was from Traverse City area. She called me, and she came to clean my house once a week. She left notes for my husband that said, "Dear Mr. McDonald, please move all the furniture in the living room because I want to wash the walls and it's just too heavy for Mrs. McDonald," which cracked me up. And then she left notes for the children saying, "Your mother pays me to clean, not to pick up your stuff. So when I come here on Tuesday morning, I don't want to see a thing on your floor. I want everything on your bed. You have second floor laundry. If you have dirty clothes, take them down the hall." She stayed with us for almost 2 years, and her last day she drove up in a brand new white Mercedes-Benz. And my husband said, "Where did you get the car?" And she said, "Well, I've always had it. I just store it." Because we'd call her on snow days and say, "We'll come pick you up." She said, "No, I need the exercise." And he said, "Rosie, why do you clean our house?" And she said, "I love putting order to chaos." And it was like one of our family. We just loved her. And that came from the Women's Center experience. Linking, as you say.
it's a great story. It's a great story. Are you still associated with the Women's Center?
Every time I go, they refer to me as one of the mothers. And I go there probably half a dozen times a year. I was asked to be on the current board, but I just had survived a house fire, so there was no way I was going to do anything but unpack boxes and thank Jesus every day that we were alive. So my involvement with the Women's Center is monetary contributions. I belong to a study group that brings gifts for people at Harbor House at Christmas. I have a collection site at my home for little travel shampoos and that sort of thing. I'm part of Rotary, and we were instrumental on our contributions committee getting Pat Miklo to write a grant. I drove her crazy to write a grant because I knew we had the money to give and we would be able to do it. I think we gave them $12,000 last year. The other thing I do is I call different organizations that are having fundraising activities, because the members pay for the tickets and then they either try to sell them or give them away. And I've encouraged groups to give the tickets to the Women's Center so people could go to the Rotary Pancake Breakfast and just feel like they're like everybody else instead of kind of hiding out at Harbor House.
I sense the practical way you deal with things
Yep.
at the nitty-gritty
Mm-hmm.
of helping. And from these other interviews, this is a community where people do that. It's
Yeah.
not just headlining. It's
We
getting
just
the
do
help.
what we have to do, and we all take care of each
Yeah.
other.
And we've talked at length with other people about the current, we're in the 2014 for your interview, issue is funding, because a lot of the grants, state, federal grants, just aren't there anymore. So the kind of work that you're doing is what's going to make a difference. This community does support, but there's still a lot out there to do. Do you have a vision for the Women's Center? Or
Well, my vision is that they would involve younger men and women to continue the support, because right now we used to call it regurgitating boards, but that's not really a good term. But we have a lot of the former members coming back, and we have a new member. Rosa Diddams is new. And I just hope that we could involve some younger people of both genders to keep it going, to keep that energy and that focus. And also, to stop looking at how the funding occurs. I mean, grants are pretty much dried up. So there have to be new ways to share the information and have people embrace the passion of it.
And it would seem like you're a good person in that role, sharing the passion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really feel comfortable with it. And, being on that contributions committee at Rotary was huge, because when Pat, you probably heard the story about when Sarah and Pat and Carolyn and Holly went to the Rotary Club in Ishpeming.
No, I didn't hear. Tell that story.
Well, they went, and in one of the packet pieces of information is introducing the Women's Center to the community. So you've got the prepared speech they worked from. And I don't know who wrote it, but it's all typed up. They went to the Ishpeming Rotary Club, and they were talking about spousal abuse and how it hits all kinds of people, varying social strata and economic abilities. And they finished talking, and they wanted them to share the information and hope for some financial support. And one gentleman, whose name I will not release ever, my lips are sealed, stood up and said, "I love my wife," and sat back down and, was just flummoxed by the whole thing. Why would you even need to address this issue? Because it wasn't anything that occurred in his house. And that's when we realized how huge this was going to be. Pat went on to get involved in the state, and then the Women's Center became recognized by Dr. Jackson at Northern Michigan University. Don Jackson was wonderful support for Holly.
That whole coming together was perfect. And then, as many have reported, probably the transition out of Northern was well timed to make it a broader community. And then you mentioned men at every level, and I've been impressed hearing the support that's come, and the gentleman who ultimately sold the current building, extremely supportive, unions supportive and contributing. So,
and the community groundswell of support.
Awesome. But like you said, it was a whole level, a cultural level, where men who weren't exposed didn't realize, and men who were involved figured it was part of what being a husband was all about. So the educational component, I think, is still going on.
It really is. I think that's a hard one. Because you don't show the woman beaten to a pulp covered with bruises. Actually, my own mother was married for a very short time to a man, and she discovered that he had cashed in some of her dividends from stock. And when she asked him about it, he beat her up. Now this is country club woman. We used to joke in our house and say, my mother's idea of things being slow was when room service was slow, when you dialed. She was a Waldorf girl all the way, and here she is married to this beautiful man living in this lovely house, and everything on the outside looked great. Well, he beat her. I saw the police picture, and you couldn't recognize her. So it happens everywhere. It was just amazing.
The other point that's been made that you might want to elaborate too is that we need to keep this going, much like other civil rights issues, because young people, we're now in, well, the 70s, and Betty Friedan,
Sure.
forget, or not forget, they don't know the history, so they take for granted that things are as they are now.
Right.
And I think part of the founding mothers issue has been we've got to remind them that we need their input, but the issues don't literally go away.
True. And you're not going to see the woman covered with bruises and bloody face and crying children and leaving her home in the middle of the night or the minute her husband leaves for work. And actually, I worked with a man who was the victim of spousal abuse. And he would come in, and I thought, God, he doesn't seem like a clumsy person, but he's always got a black eye or what looks like a big, and I'm pretty non-judgmental, but I thought, God, that looks like a big pinch mark. Now, how I would recognize that, I don't know, because I've never been pinched or pinched anybody, but he had a lot of things, and finally I said one day, just privately, are you okay? And he said, no, I'm not. My wife, it just turns into this terror, demon. And I was really shocked because, you know, at office parties they would come together and they just seemed like everybody else.
That's a very good point, and we haven't hit on it too much, is that there are men out there
Yes.
who need the support. And I think the Women's Center, the Harbor House, does address that. It's not that common,
Right.
and I'm sure, as it is for women, difficult to admit to
Yeah.
that kind of treatment. But you were made aware of it then.
I was
and
made aware of it, yeah.
Are there any other areas that we haven't talked that you'd like to comment on or experiences to share?
Well, I made some notes because I just didn't want to forget anything. Sorry about the sunglasses. I think the other thing I did recently was I went to Washington, D.C. on a bus. The Women's Center had 2 buses. And it was a wonderful experience in so many ways. It was just time to, you know, they had those stand up for whomever. And I thought, it's time to stand up for women. It's this many years later, and we still don't get the same pay for the same job. There still are so many gender issues, and I mean, it crosses all sections of humanity in so many different ways. I have a friend who graduated from Stanford, was in the first women's MBA class at Harvard, and went to work on Wall Street, and she said honestly she never had a single discriminatory issue. And I said, you know, you're just so rare, you don't even realize it. So I got on the bus, and Jane, if I ever say I'm taking a bus to Washington, D.C. again, drive your car over me and back it up and make sure I'm dead. It was the worst trip of my life in terms of time. It took forever. The bus driver had a little drinking issue. They didn't pump out the bathrooms. It was just disgusting. We got to Washington, and the march was tremendous. It was just overwhelming, the women and the men who came to stand up for equality. And one of the little sides, there's always a little side story that makes it an epiphany for you. We got into the hotel, and I can't remember if it was a Hilton or a Sheraton, and we chose that because it was right near the metro or whatever it's called. so we could walk there. And one of the young women didn't have her luggage. Well, it went from the bus to the hotel, so where could it be? And we were tired, and the person at the desk said, I don't know where it is, figure it out. So I'm always very assertive, but I'm not really aggressive, if you know what I mean. And something just snapped in me, and I said, excuse me for interrupting, but I would like to talk to the manager. And the clerk said, the manager isn't here. And I said, you need to find the manager, because I will find the 800 number for the hotel, and I will find the manager on my own. And I think that might be a little problem for you if I do that. So he called the manager. He didn't want to give me the number. Called the manager. And the manager said, was very professional. And I explained the issue. And he said, I'll have this taken care of in the next 20 minutes. And the next morning he called our room and asked to meet with me, and he wanted to buy me breakfast. And I said, no, I don't need breakfast, but I'd love to meet with you, because I really appreciated the way he handled it. Meanwhile, people had given the woman underpants and soap and toothbrushes, and the hotel had a little emergency kit. Well, the manager handled the situation so well that I wrote a letter to the corporation, whichever one it was, and I never done that step before in thanking someone, and asked that the letter be put in his personnel file, because he was a star. And about 2 years later, my husband and I were at a local restaurant, and this woman came up to the table who looked vaguely familiar. She had her parents with her. She was graduating from Northern, and she wanted them to meet me because I was the person who helped her. And I thought, isn't this one of those things where you just do something because it's the right thing to do, and you don't do it because anyone will say thank you, but when it happens, it's just wonderful.
Well, and you were modeling assertive behavior that paid off. And that's the other theme. There's so many themes that have come through these interviews, but women need mentoring. Everybody needs mentoring, but in particular, women need mentoring for some of the roles that they didn't feel comfortable taking in our other culture.
Sure.
And the exceptions stand out. Marquette has had its share of women who way ahead of time were being assertive and doing unusual careers, but it's just really come through the theme through these interviews.
Well, and I always felt with my friends that were in the upfront positions of the women, that last story made me tear up a little bit. That was so sweet. I always thought, I'll stand in front of you if you need protection, and I'll stand beside you if you just need a little support, and I'll stand behind you if you need a big shove. So I really admired what they accomplished. It was fun being a worker bee. I only had responsibility to do assertive training class or peer group or goal setting or whatever it was, but they needed a lot of support. It was fun to see, how our families reacted to all this, because
did you have support in general?
Had tremendous support
from your family.
And my mother-in-law was the first woman on the St. Luke's or the St. Luke's Hospital board. They never had a woman before, and I mean, she could have taught us how to be assertive in a minute. So when the Women's Center decided, I don't know if it was Consciousness Raising Group or Women's Center Group, but when the hospitals merged, the consciousness raising groups wanted to pass a petition asking the hospital merger, which then became Marquette General, to allow termination of pregnancy, at least to discuss that issue, and to, because some people would be opposed to pregnancy termination for religious reasons, and we certainly had to respect that, but there were other reasons for termination in cases of rape. Of course, I'd worked with that rape crisis team and gone into the emergency room and talked to women the day they were raped, and I mean, it was, they just had a horrendous time. So my mother-in-law encouraged me to pass one of the petitions. My father-in-law was a prominent judge. My husband was an attorney. My mother-in-law is going to be on the board, or was on the board. And I just didn't want to do anything to jeopardize their position. And they were all very supportive. And I carried that petition around, and most people were very willing to sign it. One person shut the door in my face, and I thought, well, that's their privilege. I respected that too. But people were pretty willing to decide it and to sign it. And once that chore was done, I went on to the next one. I just kept moving on.
In the nitty-gritty. I admire that. Can you go back a little bit? I realize I haven't touched on this. You as a volunteer and were involved in these different programs, how did the Women's Center recruit, or did people just come because of their previous history? And secondly, did you get any specialized training through the Women's Center, or did they utilize the talents you already had?
I think in the beginning they utilized the talents we had, even though a lot of us didn't realize we had those talents. Because I can remember someone said to me, you would be really good talking about assertive training. And I thought, would I? Wow. I think I knew my limitations, but I really didn't know my abilities. And they said, yeah, you would be good at that because you're a good listener. And you always say, what do you think? Because people usually, when they ask you a question, they really want validation more than advice. At least that's my impression. So for example, if you said in assertive training, we talked about, if you came to me and you said, I'm having a problem with my husband or my best friend, I would say, well, what are you doing about that? And you'd say, well, I said this. And then I'd say, what did they say? Did you have a conversation about this? And, you know, it was a skill I didn't know I had.
As opposed to giving them advice right
Yeah.
off the top.
So, interesting.
Very, very good. So now, but did they end up doing some
But
training?
they did some training as well.
Well.
Yeah, there was some training. And some of it was from our consciousness group. I remember that. I remember Frances Lamb and Marie Marcantoni did some classes with us. And I think that those were kind of enrichment things for our group to grow, our own little personal women's group to grow. Because I remember they talked about, tell me about your favorite birthday party, and it was just a way to connect with what was important at different times of your life. So,
Well, anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. It's just been, the birth of the Women's Center has just been a boon to humanity, I would say.
And you have heard at least several people reported we may be the longest ongoing women's center in the state, if not the country, which speaks, again, a small community like Marquette has supported this through the ups and downs that all organizations go through.
True. And kudos to you, Jane, because, you know, when we had the house fire, I thought of all the files that I've kept that were so important. And fortunately, they were saved. I aired them out a little bit because I didn't want to bring the scent of the fire into your home. But, you know, all these files and the fact that you're volunteering your time to put this story together from different point of view, I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's been a total pleasure to do that. So thank you for your time, Carolyn, and we'll probably touch base again. Thank
Good.
you.
That's good.
Great.